In June 323 BCE, the most powerful man who ever lived dies sobbing in a palace bathroom, his body racked with fever, begging his generals to know if they had poisoned him. Alexander the Great, conqueror of the known world, god-king of 2 continents, expires at 32 in circumstances still debated by scholars today, his final words lost to history, his empire dissolving before his corpse grows cold. The final years of Alexander begin not with decline, but with unprecedented triumph. By 327 BCE, he stands at the edge of India, having conquered everything from Greece to the Hindu Kush. His army has marched 20,000 miles. They have seen wonders that strain belief: elephants trained for war, cities built on mountaintops, rivers wider than the Mediterranean. Alexander himself has survived wounds that would kill lesser men, has crossed deserts declared impassable, has burned the Persian capital and married the daughter of the enemy king. But something changes in India. At the Hyphasis River, Alexander faces King Porus and his regiment of war elephants. The battle is won, but barely. Alexander's beloved horse Bucephalus dies from wounds sustained in the fighting. The king orders a city built in the animal's honor, weeping openly at the funeral. His men watch their commander, increasingly convinced he is losing touch with mortality itself, grieving more deeply for a horse than for the thousands of soldiers left bleeding in foreign soil. The Macedonian army mutinies at the Hyphasis River. These are not cowards or weaklings. These are men who have followed their king to the end of the earth, who have believed every impossible promise he made. But when Alexander announces plans to march further east to conquer India entire, then push onward to ocean which the Greeks believe encircles the world, his officers refuse. For the first time in his life, Alexander cannot inspire them to follow. Here is the revelation historians often overlook. Alexander's tears at the Hyphasis were not merely frustration at being thwarted. They were the first crack in a psyche that had convinced itself of divinity. Since visiting the oracle at Siwa years earlier, where priests declared him son of Zeus Ammon, Alexander had genuinely believed himself immortal, chosen, unstoppable. The mutiny forces him to confront human limitation, and he never recovers from this psychological wound. The return journey through the Gedrosian desert becomes a death march. Alexander chooses this route deliberately, knowing no army has successfully crossed these wastelands. He wants to prove himself superior to Cyrus the Great, who lost an entire force in these sands. The decision costs tens of thousands of lives. Men die of thirst within sight of their commanders. Women and children following the baggage train are abandoned. The army that emerges from the Gedrosian is a skeletal remnant of the force that conquered Persia. You would think that watching your men die for pride would humble a king. Instead, Alexander interprets his survival as further proof of divine favor. He emerges from the desert more convinced than ever of his godhood. At Susa, he arranges a mass wedding, forcing his officers to marry Persian noblewomen. He himself takes 2 additional wives beyond Roxana, the Bactrian princess he already married for political advantage. The message is clear. Alexander is creating a new world order with himself as divine monarch of a unified civilization. But his Macedonian veterans see betrayal, not vision. They watch their king adopt Persian dress and customs. They perform proskynesis, the Persian practice of prostration before the monarch, which Greeks consider suitable only for gods. When Alexander orders the execution of Clytus, his old friend who saved his life at Granicus, for speaking against Persian customs during a drunken argument, the army recognizes a tyrant, not a liberator. The revelation that reshapes our understanding of Alexander's final years. His increasing paranoia was not irrational. Recently discovered administrative documents from Babylon suggest several assassination plots were real. His closest companions were indeed conspiring against him, terrified by his megalomania and exhausted by his endless campaigns. The king, who trusted no one, had excellent reason for suspicion. In 324 BCE, Hyphasis dies. Modern scholars debate whether he was Alexander's lover, but contemporary sources make clear he was the king's other self, the only person who understood him completely. Hyphasis falls ill during a festival and dies within days. Alexander's reaction transcends grief and enters madness. He crucifies the doctor who treated Hyphasis. He orders an entire Indian tribe exterminated as a funeral offering. He shaves his head and has the manes cut from every horse in the empire. For months, Alexander cannot function. He commissions a funeral pyre that costs the equivalent of a small city. Plans are drawn for a temple to Hyphasis that would dwarf the pyramids. You must understand what this moment means. The invincible conqueror, the strategic genius who never lost a battle, is emotionally destroyed by death's reminder that even he must lose what he loves. The pretense of godhood cannot survive genuine grief. When Alexander finally emerges from mourning, he plans his greatest campaign yet, the conquest of Arabia, then Carthage, then Rome itself. He will march west until he rules the entire Mediterranean. The preparations are staggering. A fleet of 700 ships is commissioned. New military units are formed. The resources of the entire Persian Empire are mobilized for war. His generals recognize the pattern. Alexander will campaign until something kills him, because stopping means confronting the emptiness inside. In May 323 BCE, he begins to feel ill. The symptoms start after a banquet, leading to immediate suspicions of poisoning. For 11 days, Alexander deteriorates. Ancient sources describe high fever, progressive paralysis, periods of delirium. Modern medical analyses suggest everything from typhoid fever to pancreatitis to West Nile virus to poisoning by the toxic plant white hellebore, which leaves few traces. What the ancient historians recorded with chilling detail is Alexander's consciousness of dying. He maintains lucidity for days, unable to speak but clearly aware. His soldiers, hearing their king is dying, demand to see him. You stand in that line, a common soldier who followed him from Macedonia to India, and you file past his bed. He cannot speak, but he lifts his hand slightly to each man. You see in his eyes not the god-king of propaganda, but a terrified young man who thought he would live forever. The revelation that haunts historians. Alexander almost certainly knew who poisoned him if poison was indeed the cause. Shortly before losing speech, he gestures urgently to his generals, attempting to communicate something critical. The most reliable sources suggest he was trying to name his successor or reveal his murderer, but weakness overcomes him. The information dies with him. His generals ask who should inherit the empire. Alexander's reported response, to the strongest. Some sources claim he said to Crateros, naming his most capable general. Others insist he said nothing, that he removed his signet ring and handed it to Perdiccas. The uncertainty is itself revealing. In his final moment, Alexander either deliberately created chaos or was too weak to prevent it. He dies on June 10th or 11th. Sources disagree. The exact time is disputed. The body lies in state for days in Babylon's stifling heat, reportedly showing no signs of decomposition, which believers interpret as proof of divinity, and skeptics suggest means he was not actually dead when declared so, that he lay paralyzed, conscious, as preparations began for his funeral. What follows is predictable and tragic. Within hours of his death, his generals begin fighting over the corpse itself, recognizing that whoever controls Alexander's body controls legitimacy. His pregnant wife, Roxana, murders his other wives. His half-brother and infant son are eventually executed. The empire fragments into warring kingdoms. Within a generation, every member of Alexander's bloodline is dead, murdered in the civil wars between his successors. But the body itself becomes the strangest part of the story. Ptolemy, who will found Egypt's final dynasty, hijacks the funeral procession. Instead of delivering Alexander to Macedonia for burial as planned, he brings the corpse to Memphis, then Alexandria. There, encased in gold and glass, Alexander becomes the centerpiece of a personality cult that lasts centuries. Roman emperors will visit and pay homage. Caligula allegedly steals his breastplate. Then, sometime in the 4th century CE, the tomb disappears from history. Modern archaeology has searched for Alexander's tomb for 2 centuries. Dozens of sites have been proposed. Every few years, someone claims discovery. But the body remains lost, and perhaps there is poetry in that. The man who tried to conquer death through glory, who declared himself divine, who believed his name would echo eternally, is ultimately unmemorable except as story and myth. The revelation that changes everything about Alexander's legacy. Recent analysis of his military campaigns suggests many of his greatest victories were more fortunate than brilliant. At Gaugamela, the battle that broke Persian power, Darius likely would have won had he not panicked at a cavalry charge. At the Granicus, Alexander's survival was largely luck. His genius lay not in tactics, but in understanding that momentum and morale matter more than strategy, that an army believing itself invincible often becomes so. This understanding makes his final years more tragic. Alexander recognized that his power rested on perpetual victory, continuous forward motion. To stop campaigning meant his army would question why they followed him at all. He could never retire, never consolidate, never rule in peace. He was trapped by his own mythology, forced to keep fighting until something killed him. His cultural legacy is equally complex. Alexander dreamed of synthesis between Greek and Persian civilization, a unified world culture with himself as divine monarch. But this vision died with him. The Hellenistic kingdoms his generals founded maintained strict separation between Greek rulers and native populations. The cultural fusion Alexander attempted was revealed as superficial, a conqueror's fantasy, rather than genuine integration. Yet his impact on history is undeniable. Greek language and culture spread across 3 continents. Cities he founded became centers of learning and trade. The very concept of cosmopolitan civilization, of an interconnected world transcending tribal boundaries, begins with Alexander. Buddhism spreads to Afghanistan and Central Asia along routes his army opened. The next 6 centuries of Mediterranean and Near Eastern history unfold in the political structures he created. Modern historians debate endlessly whether Alexander was hero or monster, visionary or megalomaniac. The evidence supports all interpretations. He was capable of extraordinary generosity and horrifying cruelty. He showed genuine intellectual curiosity about foreign cultures while destroying them. He inspired fanatical loyalty and justified paranoia. You cannot reduce him to simple categories because he contained genuine contradictions. What we can say with certainty: his final years reveal the psychological cost of absolute power combined with unlimited ambition. Every empire he conquered increased his isolation. Every victory raised expectations for the next. Every divine honor distanced him from human connection. By the end, he ruled the world but belonged nowhere, trusted no one, and understood that stopping meant confronting the emptiness of conquest. The drinking that likely contributed to his death was not merely recreation. Ancient sources describe marathon drinking sessions, competitions to prove who could consume the most wine. Alexander drank to unconsciousness regularly in his final years. This is the behavior of someone self-medicating against unbearable psychological pressure, not celebrating victory. His relationship with his mother, Olympias, remained intense until his death. She sent constant letters demanding he execute rivals and claiming credit for his divinity. He rarely responded, but kept every letter. Psychologists examining the ancient sources see classic patterns of maternal enmeshment. A son never permitted to develop identity separate from his mother's ambitions for him. The final revelation: Alexander likely wanted to die. Not consciously, not through explicit suicide, but he took increasingly reckless risks in battle. He led charges personally when any competent general would delegate. He refused to wear adequate armor. At the siege of the Malian citadel in India, he jumped down inside enemy walls with only 2 companions. His men had to desperately fight their way in to save him. This is not courage, it is a death wish. Why would the most successful conqueror in history want death? Perhaps because success brought no satisfaction. Each victory revealed only more horizons to conquer, more enemies to fight, more years of the same pattern. Alexander conquered the external world, but could not defeat the internal emptiness that drove him. Hyphasian's death revealed this void, and Alexander could not survive seeing it. In his final conscious moments, priests were called to perform rituals. Alexander was carried to the temple of Serapis in Babylon. He wanted to know if the god commanded him to stay in the temple to die or return to his palace. The oracle's response: he would fare better remaining where he was. Alexander insisted on returning to his death chamber anyway, refusing